Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojú
The Ashen Forge. The Ashen Forge.
Welcome to the Ashen Forge. I am Phantom X, joined as always by Diggs and the legendary Neurotoxin. How are you two doing?
Doing all right.
Great.
So we have had our live stream Friday to kind of go over. I say we, it was actually Stephen and Maggie, but a lot of, I think, useful information. They had kind of hinted at some of the gathering professions, but pretty good video. I think it was pretty interesting to watch. Some pretty good feedback from it. Some information on surveying, which we kind of knew a little bit about, but now know a lot more about. And then the land management system. Among some other things, there was also a PvP 20-minute, I wanted to say small discussion, but 20 minutes worth of discussion. But we're going to start, I think, with gatherings. So I hear a vacuum cleaner getting very close to me, and I'm going to let y'all start this discussion.
All right. I'm going to first say the change from what we saw in Alpha 1 to this is completely not even a different ballpark, not even the same league whatsoever, not even the same sport, honestly. What we saw in Alpha 1 was just a probably stand-in system, not saying they just pulled some pack off the asset store and slapped it in, but something of that level of simplicity, I'm sure, is basically, what they had whipped up for it. And, functionally, it felt about that good too, with all the issues with the final stage of crafting. And then when you finish the item, it wouldn't actually give you the item. It would refund all of the resources back to their raw states, and you wouldn't get anything. And it was like that for a lot of Alpha 1. And then, it was just a big old mess. So all of the things, not just the gathering itself, that you'd see a sparkly tree that you have to hunt down, or, find just the right kind of shiny rock, or just the right kind of bush. And you see all these other things that look like things you should be able to harvest, but you can't. Not because you don't have the skill, but because they're just objects in the terrain. And so that's something we were kind of talking about before the show a little bit, was the idea that we've come a long way from old MMOs and 3D games where you're using a low poly mesh to represent your trees, just like all the other terrain and objects in the world. Because, of course, that's what you're doing. That's just, you use the low poly thing, you bake it together, PlayStation 1 graphics, great. that was where we started. But since then, we've come so far. The idea that everybody is either using Speed Tree or the equivalent of it, not a sponsor, but very common these days. You'll see it a lot of MMOs and movies and all sorts of stuff. That's the sort of thing that, okay, so now we know that they're actually like separate objects that are, computed differently. They have their own rules. They can be interfaced with. And so then the question is, well, what's the point of having them as fancy things that are out there as objects in the world if you don't go the next step and just make it so you can interface with them? So I'm glad to see that that is where things are starting to go. Again, like we were saying before the show, the idea that, after New World and, maybe some other games, the idea that you can see a tree that you can't cut down might start to be not the thing people expect to see in MMOs anymore, and that instead we are expecting to be able to cut down every tree that we see. So that's something that I'm really glad to see from what we saw in Alpha 1, and not knowing where the goal was going to be from there, to seeing that we're actually getting, the real deal gathering system that actually seems like something that would be able to interface with the land management systems that had been, again, kind of hinted at in the past, a year or two ago, or even further. it's good to actually see how it can all potentially work together and what the, closer end of what, the systems are going to look like, rather than something that was just a stand-in just for Alpha 1, just because you kind of want to know, are people even going to gather and craft and that sort of stuff. So I understood why they had it in that state, but I'm so happy that, Alpha 2 and beyond is going to be the real deal here.
Yeah, I agree. I think the new standard for an RPG, or MMORPG like this. Now I could see if there's not a big focus on crafting or anything, that it's not. But for this sort of game, that the standard now is to be able to harvest most of what you see. I think it would be a disappointment if that wasn't the case. For some reason, I was still a little surprised when they kind of put this out there. Now I don't know what everything means. Steven certainly did not take a whack at everything. I wish he would have spent more time just like literally going from rock to bush to flower, just to show us. Because also the UI, I liked the UI. It was very simple and effective, but it also didn't seem to really show up unless you were right next to whatever you were trying to get. So it was really hard to see exactly how much you were able to knock down. But Diggs, you think that's the standard?
Well, I think my only concern about having something as easy to harvest as New World is how that affects the economy. But because it seems like if you can do everything, then you don't need other people to go out and harvest for you. But I was actually, so yes, I expect things to be, if they can, like New World, if it's not going to affect the economy adversely. And of course, coming out of UE4 and Alpha 1, it was not supposed to be a gathering showcase. So there's no surprise that the gathering was bare bones and basically, like Nero said, right out of the package, the UE4 package. Yeah, I expect. I also have this level of harvesting, I think, in Disney Dream. I forget what the name of the thing is. So this is becoming a standard. It should be pretty easy to harvest. So it's not really a surprise at this point. And especially considering that this game is probably not going to be out before 2025. We should hope that we have about this level of gathering. I was actually more interested in the very, 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 very beginning discussion about gathering to see the Dunir model, which was tiny. So I'm wondering how those people who wanted the bigger, wider, beefier Dunir think about that tiny, tiny, tiny Dunir model, because it still seems tiny and cute to me and not particularly beefy. I mean, if you look at it, close up for its size, it might be beefy, but in comparison to the human player, it seemed tiny to me. So I'm just wondering if that fits the bill for what people were hoping for. But so little that I don't think people paid any attention, and I didn't hear anybody talk about it. But I'm very curious to see if that satisfied them.
Well, and there was I think a question about, will the weapons scale with the size of the model, and the answer was, of course, yes. So I'm curious if you have this big logging axe, and they're both, because one things we learned is there will probably be group gathering, which reminds me of another game that I don't know that we can talk about that part. But I
don't think so.
But I just imagine, Diggs, you pointing that out, like they're the same axe, but one just looks tiny and the other looks huge. What it would visually be like hitting the tree together. Or
I've seen games try to reconcile like a size and scale sort of thing, like in a small degree, but it was kind of an interesting feature. Vindictus, you could scale your character's height and get a differential attack speed or reach, where if you were taller, you got extra reach. If you were shorter, you got extra attack speed. So it was this little extra sort of feature of tuning you could do at character creation, and probably some way to resize yourself with like a potion that you can get by whatever means.
So I was also pretty neat. Like I said, I agree with you. I think being able to harvest everything is sort of standard. The thing that's shown a little bit for me was sort of watching the rebirth of the tree, kind of sped up, but I think that's pretty interesting to see happen. Combined with the fact that the nodes will randomly change, so that it's not the same tree in the same spot everywhere, I think will make for a pretty cool environment to kind of go through.
Yeah, for sure. And as they were saying, the seasonal effect on the trees, not just what happens when you cut them down, but how they look, how they obscure and obstruct vision in different ways, where sparse trees in the winter, you might have a clear line of sight of, what might be ahead, versus during the springtime and the summer, they've all filled in. They're all lush and green. Now all of a sudden things can sneak around in that environment unless you took a little time to like selectively cut some down here and there. And even then you would have to kind of maybe keep your little path or whatever trimmed and tidy if there's a specific area where you want to keep the trees cut down and at bay so you can get through quicker.
Yeah, and sort of connect to that, I think there was a question about NPC interaction with trees and whether they would also have the ability to knock them down, which the answer was yes. So I think it would be pretty neat to see, there's some giant raid boss, and the reason you can track it is because of seeing the trees knocked over. Now, one thing that didn't seem clear was exactly how long the felled tree lasted. Like, I didn't know if that was sped up.
I hope so, because that was something. This is getting to the thing that you had posted on Twitter and posted in the Discord and some other places about what, and it was even talked about in chat here. What was the expectation and the reality for the launch of Ultima Online? The expectation is there would be a sense of ecology. You're not going to overhunt. You're not going to, overlog. The reality is I see the things that increase my attributes, my skills, and my cash flow, and I'm going to keep doing them because this is a game, not a simulator. And so the whole part where he tried to make it a simulator with ecological ramifications kind of failed, because just on scale and stuff alone, the amount of material that you're collecting in the world compared to what you actually get to use it on and how much you can make out of it. But regardless of that, yeah, players are just, locust was the phrase used in chat there. Yeah, we'll just set up shop and eat away whatever it takes to build the resources, and if the things don't grow back quick enough, we'll move on and do it somewhere else. And if that's going to destroy the ecology of the game world because the things weren't set up to anticipate for that, well, that's what's going to happen. And so that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about with this, where I would hope a solo player at best is getting saplings or like branches off of larger trees, that they're not, going to be taking down a whole giant honking tree and hauling the damn thing back in sections in their bag. And likewise, once a medium to larger tree actually has been felled, it still comes down to what sort of crew you've got to work with it. If you've got 4 or 5 people with you, you can break it down into smaller chunks. You can bring the branches back. You can, maybe in a more whole state so they can be broken down and used for bows and other things that need more of that flexibility, versus, the trunk and more of the planks that you're going to be using to build, parts of a house or parts of like a chest or furniture, that sort of thing. So everybody's got a 2.5 foot long by 2.5 foot around sectional log that's strapped to their back, along with some branch chunks that they're going to haul back. Cool. You were able to break down that tree in the field and bring all the parts back. Awesome. for the big honking tree that like, that star Christmas tree or whatever that, New York and San Francisco and whomever cuts down from the mountains on high, where it was a perfect home and ecology for whatever it was actually, supporting there, and then gets its corpse all decorated for a holiday or whatever. That magnitude of tree, that's the sort of thing where you would require a large amount of people. It's funny to think of going and getting a large pine tree as a raid group activity. But if you really want to bring that thing all the way back whole, get the longest and thickest and sturdiest planks you possibly can, you're not going to do that with 5 people. You're going to need a bigger crew. So that's kind of part of the thing that I'm hoping to see with the scale of effort and ecology, that the 1s and 2s are what the small people are going to be getting, just going out solo and like 2 or 3 people. You can get saplings and branches and twigs and stuff, smaller things.
So
but it's, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you can finish.
The medium sort of size groups will be able to actually fell a medium-sized tree and actually be able to use the resources for it, instead of just drop it and grab a couple parts and leave the rest, and maybe it degrades, maybe someone else comes through and grabs the rest of it. We'll see. But the less sort of efficient way to manage the environment and ecology. And then of course the much larger scale, that if you're actually going to take down this big tree that requires a lot of effort and saws and all sorts of stuff to make sure it falls the right way, even though the falling doesn't actually hurt anything yet, they might still do something about that. That's where I'm hoping to see some of the mitigation, where the amount of effort it takes to really go and fell a forest isn't something 3 dudes are casually going to do in a weekend.
That sounds like a simulator to me, not a game.
Well,
okay.
So we know. So this was one of the questions, was asked about chopping down saplings, and the answer to that was no. The average player will not be able to remove or cut down things that are not fully grown. Now, as you get better and have better skills in whatever your gathering profession is, if it's logging, for example, potentially you could spec or skill point into the ability to remove saplings or younger trees, in addition to things like more resources from the tree, quicker time to fell. So from what they've told us, that you and I, well, a good example is me, as a really focusing more on processing with farming, I'll still be able to gather, but I'll probably be taking whole trees. So it's an interesting discussion. The way that they're trying to implement the land management system. I mean, that you're right. When he first mentioned that, when I didn't get to watch it live, and so when I was watching the replay and they mentioned land management, first thing that comes to mind is Ultima Online and the video of Lord British talking about how once they opened the gates, everybody killed everything in sight. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm pretty sure rabbits were used in both the Ashes example and also the Ultima Online.
Wolves and rabbits are a good example. I literally wrote an example quest for how to have like a seasonal rotational system like last year called Wolves and Rabbits. That was specifically about making a modular, adaptable sort of quest. But I feel like I probably would have written it a little bit differently now that I see a little bit more of how the systems work, because a lot of it's already built in, and what the quest is going to be is not here's a character, here's a prompt, and then the things spawn in the world, but here's the world events that are going on, not just arbitrarily, but because things led up to them. And here are the NPCs who are involved with land management, who then issue you the quests, if you so choose, to help with land management in these specific ways. That's actually a lot better than the thing that I was writing last year, because mine was more like, that things were very hard cut, that, every season perhaps conditions would kind of change around and it would get to the next step or the next phase or whatever, or, a little bit more rigid. So I'm glad to see that they're actually just having this as part of the system. And then the way that we would interface it from a quest perspective or a potentially the narrative management sort of thing is like the mayor would say, oh, well, we want to keep our bigger trees because they're producing seeds and fruit. So now for the next, however long, I only want people cutting down saplings. And so that's another way to open it up. Or I only want people, catching the smaller fish. If you catch a larger one, throw it back. They're the ones that make more fish. The smaller ones are great for eating. They don't make more fish yet. So, that's the sort of stuff that I'm, hoping to see with part of the land management is that it's not, as I was thinking about a year ago, kind of a more rigid, like, here's the things and here's the conditions you need to meet. You've got to make sure that there's at least 20 suitable rabbit burrows and bushes available, and then they'll start coming back. And then once the server has 50 rabbits in this area, I'll let you know. Then the wolves come in. Yeah, no, I like what they're doing with this. I'm really excited to see how this all actually plays out in the short and the long term.
I think it's going to potentially be a disaster, but as Woodchip said, it's all about resource degradation. But of course, if
we got to test it out.
Well, yeah, but
it.
specific to trees, well, if you let them sit there for a while, but then there becomes an ownership issue, right? So if you didn't chop it down, how long, does the tree that's chopped down belong to the person who chopped it down for a little bit? Does it go open to the public?
I don't know that there's ownership. I don't know that there's any ownership. I don't know that you keep somebody else from skinning the thing you just killed unless you actually like physically whack them and tell them to get off.
I mean, it doesn't sound like it because you can, you gather as a party. So there has to be some sort of sharing ability there.
It could or it couldn't. That could be part of the competitive and the PvP aspect of it. Is any resource out there in any partially broken down, gatherable, processable in the field sort of state is open for anybody, and that it isn't just party. That if you killed 5 deer and then a mega wolf comes along and your party's fighting this mega wolf, and some dude comes up from behind and skins your 5 deer and runs off, well, they took advantage of the situation.
I mean, so if someone pisses me off, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to their node, because one of the interesting things about this is that it is scaled. It's scalable. So it can be per node. It can be per, I guess, cluster of nodes. They even talk about how it can be as small as your freeholds. So, your crops are going to grow better if you rotate them correctly because you're taking care of the soil. But what someone really just gets under my skin, I'm going to probably put on the cheapest clothes I can. I'm going to go out as a non-combatant. I'm going to cut down everything I can. I'm going to drop what I get onto the ground so nobody has any incentive to actually kill me for it, because I'm just going to let it fall onto the ground. I'm not going to keep it. And I'm going to go through and spend 5 hours cutting their trees down, cutting their bushes down, and just seeing what happens. That is probably, if this is not balanced really well, how things will go for many nodes.
And after the 3rd tree, you hear ding, 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 ring. And then they all descend upon you with the red and blue lights. You're committing ecological crimes. We're going to have to take you down, son.
That's, you don't get any of the resources because I'm just going to drop it to the ground, because the motivation there is not to collect the resources. It's just really mess with your area is what the whole goal is. So I don't know. That's one of the things with the land management that I just wonder about. The other's the economy, like how, Stephen specifically talks about it in an offensive standpoint. So, I mean, how disruptive can you actually be if you're all of a sudden having to bring resources in from 2 nodes over? There's a lot of interesting questions to be answered.
Well, something else I think about with bringing nodes from resources over, I kind of think about that being something that will naturally occur if you got really good with working with steel or copper or some specific metal that was rich in your area. Now it's kind of depleted, but you're really good at working with that metal. Then you've got two choices: export your service and labor and all of your tools and everything to a place where they've got more of that metal, or import that metal to the place where you've got all of your facilities and everything set up. And so that's where I start to see that natural, trade progression occurring is, we built up, we used all of the marble in the mountains to build this beautiful city, but now we don't have any more marble except the city that we're not going to take apart. So we need your marble, and then we'll send some back to you all done in our perfect style.
But can a mayor then make me an enemy of the state like they're going to do for digs because I'm cutting all their trees?
Like they're going to try to. I'm pretty sure you have to have built up negative reputation for the node in order to be made an enemy of the state. So if you're doing something that is negative to the node that the node recognizes being negative reputation, yeah, probably.
The other example he gave was of a mayor puts out a request to get rid of an invasive species of plants. Well, I want to learn how to let them grow and thrive, so I'm going to kill whatever it is that gets rid of them. That's the stuff that comes to mind, is how can I just utterly mess with the system and just have fun that way. I will have so much more fun doing this than I would ever have on a caravan or on a siege. Like if I can just go out and damage someone's economy this way, it'll be so much fun.
Diggs, the funny thing is, if everybody declares you an enemy of the state on all of your alts, you can just claim somebody is actually one of your alts, and they'll just get declared an enemy of the state, and it's like, haha, that's not actually me, but I got you anyway.
I mean, the whole game is filled with my alts. That's playing, so.
Really, what we're playing is Diggs alt. Ashes of Priest is just the wrapper for it.
Yeah, I'm more curious about how land management might affect events than I am how it might affect the economy. I'm not sure it will impact events all that much. Steven hasn't talked about that, I don't think. But that's what I'm more curious about is how depleting all that stuff. And I think that's kind of what you want to know with regard to that UO video is how will the environment retaliate? How will the bosses and the mobs react to some resource being depleted?
Yeah. Although, the very interesting thing I get at the end of that video, he says, they could not increase the spawn rates enough to keep up with players killing things. Now, it's a lot of time has passed. Ashes of, Vera is going to be probably much larger than, what Ultimate Online was set in. So I don't know that it will be that bad, but people like to kill stuff.
I thought I heard Steven say that he wants a scarcity of resources to drive PvP.
He did, and that was in the end. Was that I think it was like the last question.
So sounds like it's not going to be about having a whole bunch of stuff spawning. They want stuff not to be spawning so that will drive PvP, is what I understood from that.
Yeah, but I guess this is where the testing comes in. It's how balanced is the system. I mean, if you have 10,000 people per server, how quickly can I go kill all the rabbits in one node? I guess that's my question. Like,
you don't have to kill all of the rabbits. You just have to kill enough rabbits for people to PvP.
Yeah, but I mean, I worry because then we think of the PvP component. So, obviously they've asked multiple questions now indicating that that gathers our content, for the game. So how does that then further impact the land management? So if I just cut down 100 trees and I have 500 logs in my bag, somebody takes half of that or whatever I drop. I'm going to go kill another 50 to get, so it's just how that all comes together as a whole is very interesting to see how things are left. I hope this is something that I get to help test. Even if you're watching, I am game for anything gathering or crafting. This is sounds super fun to figure out how to break it is what I want to do. So the surveying was also kind of interesting. Any thoughts on that process? I want to start by saying I actually like the idea that some of the things we don't know, obviously you're going to know what tree is what, but for the rocks, not knowing what's inside, I think is a pretty neat way to go. And I don't know that I would care to look unless I'm specifically hunting something. Just because of the unknown kind of drives that desire for me anyways to keep going.
Has me thinking about borrowed wood and landmark, but okay. Recognize trees.
I like the idea of surveying, having things you can access in it that don't require mastery and specialization, that if you're planning to put down pylons and use that whole system, then yeah, you're going to be specializing in it, but that you could potentially get some of the skill of it and some of the feature, like you can, for example, hit a rock once and then examine it with, a lower level sort of surveying ability and see, oh, okay, well, it's got this sort of a shine to it. It's got, these sort of fragments in it. It might have silver in it. It might have topaz in it, whatever. And that there might be lesser or more simple methods that players will have to know, well, wait, is this the rock I want to break? Or due to the current land management, do I want to just kind of scratch it and see and then move on if it's not the right one? So that is something that I'm interested in, is what sort of not full-blown surveying skill mastery sort of stuff will players already be able to do, and then where the surveyor themselves is going to fill in the gaps of being able to really get like, okay, these are definitely the ones you want to break and not those ones. Being able to identify this tree in particular has the stuff that we're looking for. That sort of stuff. I don't know how much they're going to do quality levels with things if you're going to have, sturdy oak logs versus plain oak logs versus disease-ridden oak logs that had, been chewed on by termites or had some sort of infection or something that weakens their quality and capabilities. And then if surveying will be one of the tools required to kind of help avoid the lesser ones, that you can leave them alone and they'll be okay for the ecology. But if you cut that one down compared to the healthier one next to it, or the one that's got better material next to it, you're not going to be getting as good a deal as the other tree. So that's the sort of things I'm, wondering and hoping to see. The thing I did kind of also think about was the surveying tool from Landmark. You press the button, it makes this little bubble expand and shrink or whatever, and then you see a glow of all the resources through the walls. Now, that was a voxel digging game, so completely different. I wouldn't expect it to work like that, but something where there's like a projected area, and in that area there's like highlighting and different information. I could see that as being part of how the pylons work.
I mean, the pylons sound unnecessarily complicated and complex to me, that you have to set up these different things so that you can see an area, over time, as you get more skill, you can expand outwards, you can add more pylons. They talk about setting out the pylons to form the curvature of the of the underground area that you're in. It seems just very complicated versus your example of pushing a button and sending out an echo that then returns to you what you want to know. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. It sounds interesting, I guess, to test. It sounds like something I would get very frustrated with over time. That I don't want to have to keep doing this every time I'm looking for the gold ore. Now, I would maybe change my mind. Well, no, even then I wouldn't. I was going to say that one of the things that is also very interesting to me in this process is being able to learn about plants and crops and things like that. So obviously I will probably utilize that, even though, again, I won't be a master gatherer. I'll be more of a master processor. But I'm just, I don't know. That this just seems very tedious to me over time. Maybe it's fun. I don't. They can get some fun out of it, but it just seems complicated.
Yeah, and I think part of that might be related to how resources move. Um, Part of the fun of gaining knowledge and being a master at your craft, or a master of specific knowledge, is you kind of know where stuff is going to grow and where it's not. You know where gold is likely to be and where it's not likely to be. You know where silver is likely to be and where it's not likely to be. Um, that and from an RPG standpoint, that's part of what you want your character to be good at. Kind of knowing that from experience, rather than, I don't know what placing pylons down, how that's supposed to help you determine that. But usually you just become proficient at knowing, okay, if this stuff is around in this kind of um, environment, then I can expect to find this. Um, so yeah, once you get to be a master and you still have to put all these things down in order to figure out what's there, especially when you're talking about wood versus um, minerals. I don't know how easy it is to anticipate where minerals are going to be, but
Mhm.
wood, you kind of would
Well,
tend to know
okay, and with
what's going to
that,
grow where.
I'm gonna bring up something because that was kind of a funny other part, the idea of the hidden resources, the hidden materials that you only see with surveying. And so I'm thinking, for the context of trees, does that mean we're finding special parts of the wood that, if they're cut a certain way and processed a certain way, they're going to be better than if you just cut the tree down as normal? Or is it more with surveying, it's like, hey, there's a whole stump there that's full of really good wood. Like, why don't we dig that up too? Well, golly, surveyor, I hadn't even thought about that. Like, that's kind of an odd sort of thing, like where surveying is going to reveal a hidden tree or something hidden within a tree that can be gotten separately. Yes, Star Wars Galaxies had surveying, and part of that was finding the densities of certain materials in an area so you could try to optimize, like, where you're getting the stuff, and then after it starts getting mined out, you pick up your tools and place it down somewhere else and that sort of stuff. But that also, it was the secondary part of that, is that it was actually, no, probably more the primary part, the procedural material system, that things came, they were there for a short season. Rarer materials and higher quality sort of stuff was more scarce, more concentrated, and went away faster. And you would never see it again. And you could never resynthesize a material that you had previously seen. So you would have stacks and stacks and stacks of all these different materials that you were able to get over these, like, few day to multi-week long sort of seasons that they were available. I love the system. I've seen other game do that. It had a talking shark. Other than that, I don't think people really try to do that for the most part, and I certainly don't think Ashes is going to try to do that in particular. But yeah, they did have a surveying system for minerals and gases. Maybe for plant life too, but I can't remember. And then you'd make whatever out of the stuff.
I don't know. I put this in chat. I just think of WoW archaeology when it came out. I don't know if it's the same. Maybe it is. It was so boring to have to set something down and then go somewhere else, set something down, go somewhere else. Um, over time, I'm also thinking of this in an open PvP setting. Like how much time is it going to take to actually do a survey? Like, are we actually
Enough
talking?
time for you to be PvP'd.
Well, are we talking minutes to set it all up and to actually find what's there?
The the thing that I'm also wondering, did he ever actually say the range of a pylon?
Not the initial. Now he did say that with skill and as you put points in, you will be able to expand that range.
But that is very vague in itself, because these pylons could be like, a quarter mile or bigger, like really large radius. So it's not like you're just, setting down a whole bunch of them all over willy-nilly, because that's just what you got to do to see what things are, and you got to pick them up and move them all the time. But that a surveyor or a team of people with a surveying skill are working with the city land management, or the node's land management stuff, to strategically put down pylons in places so the residents of that area, and maybe visitors of some kind, like, if you're a vassal, then people higher up the chain perhaps, would be able to go there and see the fruits of that surveying set down in that area. But then, PvP, is funny you mentioned that. I also wonder, can people from the outside find that pylon, attune to it, or whatever, however you're going to interface with it, and then go and hunt the good resources in someone else's area?
I'll just pick it up.
Exactly.
Well, I guess part of it, I'm also going off the assumption of what this sort of system typically is like, is that you get a flash of what's there and then it disappears, and then you got to do it again and it disappears. I mean, I guess conceivably,
I don't think that's it.
Yeah, conceivably they could be creating a system where you actually get a map of a small area that you get to keep. That it doesn't disappear, which I think changes things. It makes it a little bit, I think, easier if you only. I guess in my mind it would be more how many deployments per action, right? So if I have to do this 10 times to mine 10 things, that's going to get so tedious. It's so boring. If I have to do it once to mine 10 or 20 things, then that's different.
Actually, now that I think about it, I wonder if it's almost more of an informational fog of war sort of thing, that you don't know what's out beyond the borders of your node, short of where you've put the nodes down and maybe a short radius outside the node itself. So it could be, if there's an iron node like 10 feet out the front door, sure, it's within the node's own sort of default survey radius. Of course, you're going to know that's iron. It's known because it's just in an area where you know that sort of thing. But if you want to extend further, or place something that's not within the node and have a remote location of information, that you would have to use a surveying pylon to do that. And so that's kind of what I'm wondering with it, if that's a little bit more of the, not necessarily that's the interface that we'll see it by, but more kind of like a broad way to visualize how it will actually function. And when looking at it that way, that makes it a little bit easier, I think, to visualize it from a more pulled out, like half miles and mile radius sort of perspectives, not like, what can I see within 20 feet of me for a flash, and then I got to run around and do what I can with it sort of stuff. We'll see all this stuff might still be in test. They might not even know yet, just have a good idea and some examples.
Something that seemed also interesting to me, and I guess kind of makes sense. I ran out of time looking for this. When we first interviewed Steven, I'm pretty sure I asked, could I just be an artisan? Can that be the primary way that I grow as a character level, for lack of a better word? And I'm almost positive the answer was yes. And so one of the things that came up, I think it was a question at the end about PvP, and well, what if crafters just make low level alts, that can gather things, and that it keeps that level discrepancy there. And the answer was, well, it was a kind of a vague answer like he tends to do, but essentially came down to, it sounds like gathering, you're going to sort of you're going to be required to level as a character in order to progress within gathering. That makes sense in a standpoint of zone areas. You know, certainly if they have areas that increase in level and you're wanting to harvest things that are specific to those areas, I guess that makes sense. But it also does sound like, similar to New World, that the tools that you're going to have access to, either through the surveying tools, or even like an axe, is going to be based off of your character level, is sort of what the answer kind of sounded like, which I absolutely hated with New World. That the idea that I couldn't use the next level axe for the next level tree until I reached a certain character level drove me absolutely insane. It sounds like that's going to be implemented here as well, that you're going to sort of be forced to level as a character in order to continue up the progression of gathering. The question was actually, I think, more in a crafting area, but he answered specific to gathering. So I don't know for sure that applies to processing, to crafting. You know, as a processor, am I going to have to level my character in order to use the next best, you know, milking machine for the cows or something? I really hope that's not the case. You know, as I've always said, my whole goal here is to not necessarily have to combat unless I have to, you know, unless it's just required. I would rather figure out how to function on a freehold. So I thought that answer was interesting. Again, specific to the gather, I guess that makes sense as you're going to new areas, but I wonder how it applies to the other artisan classes as well.
One thing that I will bring up with Alpha 1 is that they, if I'm not mistaken, had a level requirement for tool quality there as well. So I could see that being part of it, other than the fact that, you know, the stealthiest level 10 rogue is still going to smell utterly foul and distasteful to that level 40 creature by the tree you're trying to knock down. And even if you got to it in stealth, and even if you could somehow try to chop at it in stealth, it's already going to smell you because you're you know, much lower level, and it will just aggro on you when you try to stealth over. And so there's not just the difficulty barrier of will you even be able to access that material to begin with, because it's going to be off the beaten path. As we know, the level like 10 to 20 ranges that strip along the beaten path for the most part, you get off of that, that's where you're starting to see the 30, 40 plus content. And so that's going to be a constant throughout the game. You're not going to be able to go and gather the high quality materials at a low level with ease unless you've got a lot of people protecting you. I mean, really protecting you, like escort mission, because you're going to be the juicy target that gets aggroed on first. You're going to be a squishy one too. They might just drop an AoE on you and then focus on the real fight, because that'll kill you out of, you know, right off the bat. So that's, I think, two of the things where it's not just, you know, an imposed level limit, which, you know, take it or leave it, but also the implied you will get chewed up and spit out limit. And if you've got to put that much risk of taking damage to your materials and losing resources you gathered to try to get that next tree, to try to get that next rock, that's out of your league because you don't want to get grief PvP'd, you might be making more work for yourself than is worth it.
So Terradin asked a good question of, you know, does gathering and crafting produce EXP? The answer, I think, is yes. I mean, we know it contributes to the node, and it does to the character as well. But I would assume it's at a lesser rate that it would require. I mean, that's how most of games that award experience, I guess, except for Lord of the Rings. I'm ahead of all of you in that just because of farming. But so yeah, I mean, it would award experience, but I still, just the idea that, you know, if we're going to treat artisans kind of as a standalone, which is what Stephen has always said, this kind of goes back to the idea of as your crafter gains experience, the randomness should be reduced. I'd say, you know, that the next best tool shouldn't be based off of a character level. It should be based off of what is your skill actually in the profession that is using the tool. And that's just what drove me nuts about New World so much, that I could go harvest. Well, that's the same example. I mean, New World awards experience through trees, but if you're going to go out and just cut down trees and mine wood, it's going to take you forever to level.
Yeah.
So you just reach a point where you're forced to go combat, because there's just no other way to reliably progress in a way that, unless you want to just try to take 8 months to reach a certain level.
That was the lesson I learned playing New World, that by the time I got to level 40 or 45 or whatever, I realized, golly gee, I did this the dumb way the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
You get to max level, you get just whatever max tier quality tools that you can equip and get for cheap, because everybody's still grinding their skill at that point. It's going to be a little expensive, but you fight, you can go do the things to get the materials and negotiate the trade that way. And you'll get your tools, and then you can start harvesting. Oh man, it goes so much faster when you've got your max tier tools starting from 0. It's just night and day difference. It's like you're just wasting your life trying to do it starting from level 1. Just wait till level 60. Then was it 60 or 50? I don't think I got to max level. I think I petered out a little early, because it was just like, it's the same thing all over. I want to run over this place.
I did Care Bear Challenge a few times in with some of my alts in World of Warcraft, leveling through gathering and no killing, and some I did with no killing, no deaths. And it takes a while, but if you're a hardcore time player, it's not an issue so much. If you're a casual time player, then yeah, that's super problematic. But all depends on what you're looking for. It's not going to work well in a PvP game, for sure. But
that is something that I've been wondering and thinking about. And no sound. Oh no. The thing that I'm thinking about with, or I guess we should say it there, the
resource expertise. That's what we
resource expertise is that I like it as a part of why there will be an economy and economic factors and people wanting and needing to work together to make the best of things. That the best sword blades are made from an alloy of these two metals. Well, you've got someone who's a master in both of those metals. Awesome. They can make that alloy all day. The highest quality versions of those metals you can give them, the better the alloy they can make out of it. You can make some legendary sort of stuff. Something fit for the gods. And of course, you need a hilt to put that in that's going to be nice and sturdy and well balanced and comfortable and all that. So you need somebody who knows those materials really well. And it could be that there's maybe, what I would be expecting to work on is anything that's very specifically anti-corruption from an offensive perspective. I want to make bows and arrows that shoot corrupted things dead real good. So it's likely that there's specific materials that I'm going to have to specialize in order to, like, very, very specific materials in order to be able to make the absolute best of those sorts of things day in and day out. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to see with it. And then that kind of goes back to my idea that copper should never just be a tier 1 resource. So long as you're making things that are conductive in some way, maybe you need, copper or gold or something like that to channel lightning as part of some piece of equipment. All right. Well, copper shouldn't just be a low quality material. It should be, if you make crappy copper, you've got crappy copper. But if you've got good copper, sweet, you can make some really nice conductive sort of stuff and make good items out of it. So that's the other sort of like resource specialization I'm hoping to see.
Yeah, I guess the way I read that, because it was connected to the surveying, or it came after that, was, I don't know. I had thought about that more in are you able to specialize into, I can find gold. Like, that's my resource expertise.
I see what you're saying.
I have no idea. Mithril.
That could be. Your favorite enemy, but instead it's a resource.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I'm curious to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I could have a completely wrong interpretation of that one. There were some questions they had. I want to make sure we get to those before we wrap up.
We already talked about one, more or less, which was feedback on kind of not being able to see what's inside an ore. So how we felt about the presentation of both the surveying tool, but then revealing resources, but then also not knowing until you completed the harvesting action. Which
Got one more on ore. Rock is rock. If I see a giant boulder, I want to break off and roll back home. It's going to be part of the terrain, and that would require some special server tools to allow me to break that off and do something. So that one's probably not going to happen. But the thing that I was thinking about with it is that the rock itself, the stone that you find, should not be generic. If it's basalt, if I can see that it is basalt because that is the material on it, and it is going to have some sort of, base rock material and some rare gemstones or ore in it, that base rock material should damn well be basalt because that's what the thing's made out of. And so even with that, it's that I think generic rock, generic stone is something that could actually go away, and that everything has, a level of specificity. Using basalt versus marble for the stuff that you're going to put in a sock that you're going to, knock things out by hitting him in the back of the head with, sure, that's whatever any stone will do in that case. But the fact that you've got basalt means the properties of that stone can be used differently than, calcium carbonate or something that you find somewhere else.
Diggs, you're pretty quiet today.
Hold on 1 second though. My browser just yeah, I just have to test that. We'll see.
Okay, that's a fair answer. What were the other question? I just lost what I was looking at.
There's one feedback on the visual fidelity. How do you think about the visual fidelity of the trees and rocks? The rocks look a little chunky when you break them, but I'm fine with that because you just broke chunky rocks. What I didn't like is that you broke them open and then you can see this nice shiny ore that's been revealed. It's like, great, now let's go back and finish it off because we know that the ore is in there. It's like, no, we're just walking away. No, go back and get it. So that's the thing I hope we don't see is if you bust rock open and you see that there's ore inside, that it isn't just this, oh, hey, pretty shiny, good job, but it's indicative that, all right, you keep busting this thing, you're getting more ore. Good work.
Yeah, I mean, the visual stuff looked fine.
Looked pretty in the world. That tree falling didn't look too bad.
No, I think it's cool seeing the dust come up, seeing it change to the snow come up. Wow.
Anyway, Diggs, was there anything else that you wanted to say on the final three questions there?
Not on the final three questions. I think the only other thing for me was also that Stephen was playing a pirate, I think, in the demo, in the gathering demo, which I was thinking was a Nakua at first because it kind of looked like a halfling, but then I realized the hat he was wearing, that was branchlers going through and not just horns on the hat. So I think that was a pirate, a little bit smaller than I was expecting. Again, seemed like it could have been a halfling just by its size. So I'm curious just to see how people will be responding to those characters in the game once we can see everybody matched up, all the different races matched up with each other.
But we don't know if he's messing with the height sliders too, and that would be hilarious if all the videos they're intentionally going with like the most blown out proportions. So like the tiniest Nakua or the biggest, and you know, maybe the tiniest orcs or whatever, where you'd expect them to be potentially larger. Just, you know, the ones inverting maybe the way that you would expect them to be. So instead of where you've got, you know, the short one here and the tall one here, that they, you know, they're almost the same height, even though they're, you know, dynamically different sort of, you know, appearances that you would normally see. That I'd kind of think that'd be funny if they do that, just to make sure we don't actually get a proper sense of the scale of the characters until Alpha 2.
Well, it is now after our time. So
Yep.
we still have plenty more to talk about next week. And
Oh,
the week
yeah.
after. We've not gone through any questions. Like I said, there was
That
a
PvP
good,
stuff.
yeah, there was a good 20-minute talk on PvP, you know, and I have a lot of thoughts. I have it all transcribed, and I have comments about, like, highlighting a lot of the things he said. I'll just leave it with my personal thought here, because a lot of this risk versus reward, he talks, there's a lot of talk about you can't sense achievement. You can't experience the sense of achievement if there's not risk associated with it. And that is often in the context of doing something unique and special. And my just a deep-seated thought that I have that I disagree with Stephen is that if you somehow are limited in your ability to feel self-achievement because someone else has also experienced achievement, there's something flawed with you and your ability to appreciate what you've done with your life. Because often this is, well, if everyone gets a reward, somehow my reward is diminished. Well, no, if I put in the time and I reach that achievement, that means something. And it should not matter what someone else has done. And that is where I'll leave that. There's a lot more to kind of talk about. But all right. Everyone have a great week. We will be back here next Sunday.
Sounds good.
And I'll fix
See
the
you,
screens
everybody.
if Dance falls off again.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.